Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, how are you? I hope you are fine. We are from third group of Advanced English Grammar from AK class, and our topic today is about relative clause. Before we are going to explain our materials, let me introduce myself and the other member of my group. My name is Bahrul Lugas Alfizar, and the other members are Alfina, Lailatul Masrukin, and Nurlina. Perhaps they will introduce themselves before they are going to explain the materials. And our materials is about relative clauses as modifiers of nouns, WH and non-WH relative clause, the relative element, and etc. First, the meaning of relative clause. A relative clause is a special kind of subordinate clause whose primary function is as modifier to a noun or nominal. And here the examples of relative clause as modifiers of nouns. The first form is the secretary wrote to all members who were absent from the meeting. Second, the film which I needed is unobtainable. The relative clause here are introduced by the relative pronouns who and which, whose interpretation is provided by their antecedents, members, and film, respectively. But how we can distinguish between relative clause and content clause? First, relative clause. Here the example of a case. Relative clause, they reject the suggestion which your son made. For content clause, they reject the suggestion that your son was lying. For first suggestion as the ascendant marked by which, and the meaning of relative clause is your son made a suggestion and they rejected. For second, the content clause meaning it's something like give a content of the suggestion as the explanation below. The subordinate clause not linked to suggestion because they don't have any anaphoric link. It merely gives the content of the suggestion. Next, WH and non-WH relative clause. The relative clause that to contain an overt anaphoric link like who or which are called WH relatives. There are others that don't, and they are the non-WH relatives. See the illustration below. For WH relative, the film which I needed is not obtainable. For non-WH, the film that I needed is not obtainable. For bare relative, the film I needed is not obtainable. Here, the non-WH relatives with the subordinator are called that relatives because it was marked by a subordinator that. Those where the subordinator is omitted are called bar relatives.
Okay, next I will explain the relativized element. The over or cover element relative that is inappropriately linked to the head noun is called the relativized element. There are two types of the relativized element. There is WH relative and non-WH relative construction. For example, WH relative, some friends who saw her. The relative here is related to the subject, a key which she found. The relative here is related to the object, those books which I referred to. The relative here is complement of preposition. The day when you were born. The relative here is adjunct of time, a place where you can relax. The relative here is adjunct of place. The reason why she got angry. The relative here is adjunct of reason. Notice that different words beginning with we had that are used here: who for people, which for things, when for times, where for place, and why for reasons. And all the examples here we call over element relative because it uses we had relative as the connector. And another types of relativized element is non-Weha relative construction. For examples, some friends that saw her, a key that she found, those books that I referred to, the day that you were born, a place that you can relax, the reason that she got angry. Parentheses around that indicate as usual there is optional in such cases but that and birth relatives are permitted. And all the examples here we call cover element relative. And notice the non-Weha construction is not always available when the relativized element is adjunct or complement of place. With the head noun place is perfectly acceptable. But in the sentence with head nouns less likely to suggest location, a Weha relative will normally be required. Next, relative element within an embedded clause. For examples, a key which he says she found, a key that he says she found. In the example A, it is Weha relative, and in the example B, it is non-Weha relative. In these examples, the relative is object of found, and the found clause is a content clause functioning as complement of says. So we understand that he says she found some key, and that's the key the whole noun phrase refers to. And in other examples, some boys who he says saw her, some boys that he says saw her. In these examples, the relative here is subject of the embedded saw clause. So we understand that he says some boys saw her. And notice that in the example some boys that he says saw her, the that here is unmiscible. This is differs from some friends that saw her. Above in that, the relative element is subject not of the relative clause itself, but of the content clause embedded within it.
And the last is the relative phrase, the more complex kind of relative construction found only in the Weha type. For example, the first, she hasn't been able to contact the people whose house she is renting. The second, this is the article from which they were quoting. The third, he set us problem the answer to which can be found in the textbook. The relative phrase is the one marked by double underlining, while the relativized element is just whose or which. It is just the letter, not the word relative phrase, that is anaphorically related to the head noun. The relative phrase, the constituent occupying initial position in the clause, while the relativized element, the element that is anaphorically related to the head noun, the element we have been representing as are. In the first, for example, it is just whose, not whose house, that has people as its antecedents. We can represent the clause as she rentings her house with her anaphorically related to the people. Similarly, in the second and third, the head nouns, article, and problem are antecedents just for the pronoun which. That's all from our explanation. If you have any question, write down on WhatsApp groups. Thanks for watching.